On Tuesday, July 13th, the Day Bargaining Committee presented this slideshow to management as a response to a slideshow presented to us on June 13th by management. As per our ground rules, we were unable to record that session, so we've recorded this slideshow with the information we presented for our members to access at this time. And the slideshow presented by management provided us with some context around current financial issues that are shaping the administration's perspectives, and it seems their approach to cost savings and many of the proposals that we've seen at the table. Given this, we wanted to have an opportunity to address both the short-term COVID crisis as it relates to this financial context and the larger structural concerns of declining enrollments that were raised. While we do not dispute that both COVID and enrollments have presented challenges to our institutions, we do take issue with some of the framework and certainly with many of the conclusions that seem to have been drawn from these issues. So we would like a chance to address those here. Management's presentation began with this slide identifying the impact of COVID on our institutions. We understand that the past year, as this picture suggests, has been unprecedented in many ways. But this is the very reason why we're concerned with any attempt to use this past year as an example for creating long-term changes. Things like changes in contract language. This short-term crisis of COVID has been met with sacrifice and action by the campus community and by our members. In addition to accepting 0% increases while completely shifting our work to online formats, many of the other cost savings mechanisms put into place at our institutions were also significantly felt by faculty and librarians. These included hiring freezes, which left needed faculty and librarian lines unfilled, significant cuts to part-time faculty across the system, overall reductions in APRs, with many of our members continuing to do this work on top of their other required duties just without any release time or compensation. The elimination of other faculty programs and initiatives, reductions to department budgets, and the early retirement and separation incentive that further cut faculty librarian lines without any guarantee for replacing those individuals. In addition to these key cost-saving sacrifices, our universities also were aided by key areas of relief that helped us weather this crisis. In particular, the fight for level funding from the state and federal COVID relief were won, at least in part, from the significant engagement of our members in pushing for these outcomes. We know that while these were difficult times, these cost savings and relief measures meant our institutions were able to address their budget shortfalls in fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, with several ending up with much larger revenues than expected. Notably, Salem State ended up with $23 million more than they had anticipated, although their administration chose to continue to go through with faculty, librarian, and staff furloughs despite this money in the black. And several other institutions were also able to put money back into their reserves. While we know that our institutions are continuing to address the COVID crisis in their fiscal year 22 budgets, the HERF monies and potential additional relief funds will mean that they will be able to make a recovery. It is clear here that the sacrifices and actions of our members were essential to getting us through these times, but it is not clear that the pandemic can or should be used as a rationale for further faculty librarian cuts, increased workloads, or even future financial planning at our universities. Management also addressed declining enrollments as a larger structural concern that the universities are facing. Again, we acknowledge that at many of our institutions, declines in enrollment are creating significant challenges. But to treat these as singular, unprecedented, or a clear reason for damaging bargaining proposals is problematic. Enrollment declines must be understood within the larger context of state funding, college costs, program offerings, and equity initiatives. While many of our universities are experiencing some challenges with enrollments, fluctuations in enrollment numbers are a normal part of operating contingencies, with some years seeing increases and others seeing decreases. Additionally, the larger concern about overall declining numbers of high school graduates in the state and across the country is not something new. This issue has been coming and known for at least a decade. Lastly, while 2020 enrollment numbers certainly paint a very dire picture, when we look at enrollments from 2016 to 2019, these challenges seem less daunting and suggest a more accurate picture of the issue. The Department of Higher Education website provides a clear understanding that from 2016 to 2019, for first-time freshman enrollments, the decline is not true across all institutions, and when it has occurred, it is more of a matter of a few percentage points rather than a steep and unmanageable drop-off. If we look here, it seems, given 2020, that we've seen at Bridgewater State University a almost 14% decline, but if we look at the 2016 to 2019 numbers, we see a slightly different picture there. In fact, one of increases up until the COVID year. Even at other institutions that have fared less well over the past years, we do see a different picture of the decline in enrollments from 2016 to 2019 than we do given 2020. These numbers present a more accurate picture of the struggles that we're facing as a university and are better used to plan for the future than the 2020 enrollment years. Equally important in acknowledging 2020 as an outlier in relationship to enrollment concerns is the recognition that the narrative of inevitable declines in college enrollment based on the reduction of high school graduates is problematic. This narrative rests on an assumption that college enrollments will remain largely unaltered with respect to who currently enrolls in our colleges in the future. This assumption is particularly concerning given the BHE's avowed equity agenda and the expressed desire of many of our institutions to address the racial equity gap in higher education. This slide comes directly from the Board of Higher Education and shows very clearly that if our institutions are able to increase the accessibility of college to prospective Brown and Black students, as well as others that have been less likely to continue their education post-high school, that enrollment declines would not be something we are worried about. Given the increased funding and attention to early college initiatives, we would hope that such an outcome would be forthcoming. While we take issue with some of the ways that COVID and enrollment problems have been represented, more concerning to us are the conclusions drawn from both these short-term and long-term financial issues. These conclusions seem to suggest that it is largely the responsibility of faculty and librarians to shoulder the burden of addressing these problems. Additionally, the bargaining proposals presented also point to cutting faculty and librarian pay and positions as the only way to save our schools. Clearly, that is apparent in this university's plan, as projected enrollment declines are met with cuts in full-time faculty and supplemented by a rise in part-time faculty to ensure the workload is covered. What we don't see is any suggested cuts to other positions. It seems problematic that in an institution of education, it is the educators that are getting cut first. This is particularly troubling given the rise in administrative positions that we've seen across most of our campuses. With years of enrollment growth, many of our institutions also witnessed a growth in administrative positions. Yet there has not been a correlative discussion of how drops in student enrollments might necessitate a reassessment of the numbers of administrators on our campuses. For example, Westfield State is one of the institutions that has seen significant declines in enrollments over the years. Their enrollments are nearing 2007 levels. Through recent separation agreements and hiring freezes, the faculty librarian numbers have also declined to around 2007 levels. However, while in 2007, Westfield only had 2 vice presidents, they now have 5, plus 2 associate vice presidents, and all of the additional staff that are added with these positions. This creates a significant cost to the university that is hardly being discussed when we consider our current financial and enrollment challenges. Additionally, putting the burden of saving our schools on the shoulders of faculty and librarians also places buildings before people. During the years of growth, many of our institutions put significant money toward buildings and, in particular, residence halls, many of which they cannot fill right now given the changes in enrollments at our institutions. More concerning, the requirement of covering this capital debt has become a financial burden to our institutions and our students, with thousands in student tuition going to cover these debt operations, meaning many of our students are taking out their own student loans to cover our campus debt. In addition, the bond agreements, as management pointed out in their presentation, often place further demands on our universities, limiting choices in how they can navigate tight budgets. It was great that our institutions were able to see some relief from the MSCA restructuring to help us through the pandemic. But it is concerning to see that a number of our institutions are moving forward with additional building projects at a time when faculty and librarians are being told that saving our schools will require bargaining proposals that make it easier to eliminate full-time and tenure-track jobs. While we acknowledge that the pandemic and declines in enrollment present challenges to our universities, we do not accept the conclusion that the best way to address these are through the bargaining proposals presented. At some of our institutions, evidenced here in this slide that has come from a university presentation, it is clear that at least some of our presidents see a smaller, less secure, and more overworked workforce as the best way to achieve financial sustainability. We do not agree. The other category offered in this slide was not explained, but we have a few ideas about other ways our administrations, presidents, and the Council of Presidents might seek solutions to our current financial difficulties. Reassessing building projects and our current debt burdens, working with our K-12 system to better address the problem of equity in college enrollments, right-sizing our administrations to better align with the numbers of students we serve, and most importantly, working with our union and our members to win better funding for our universities and a debt-free future for our students. Ultimately, the choice to undermine faculty librarian employment as a means for saving our schools makes little sense. Our missions should be what guide us during these difficult times, and what is clear about these missions is that teaching and learning, the relationship between students and educators, is the heart of what we do. Supplanting our educational missions for a short-sighted business judgment is not only bad for business, but bad for education.